everyone, and welcome to the SESI Talks. Today, we are here with Dr. Luca Ratti, Associate Professor in European and Comparative Labour Law, and with Dr. Sonja Becker, Associate Professor in European Social Policy. Thank you both for being here. As you know, we're here because we're as part of the project WeEP, which is Workers and the European Parliament. It is our objective to bring to the attention of workers and citizens the actions of the European Parliament. And we know that you're inside of the Workers Yet Poor project, which is a very interesting and helpful project because it tackles the issue of the working poor. And I'm going to ask the first question to Dr. Ratti. What is the Working Yet Poor project all about?
Good morning, everyone. Well, the project focuses on an increasing trend of people who work but nonetheless are below the at risk of poverty line. It's a project that has been funded by the Horizon 2020 scheme and has started in February 2020. According to Eurostat, the poverty line, the at risk of poverty line, is defined as affecting those households with disposable income is below 60% of national disposable median income. The project gathers 12 partners, of which 9 universities and 3 social rights institutions, including the European Social Observatory and the European Anti-Poverty Network. We cover 7 European countries, namely Luxembourg, Belgium and Netherlands, Sweden, Germany, Italy, and Poland. Each team is multidisciplinary in the sense that it includes lawyers, economists, sociologists, and statisticians. The basic assumption of the entire project is that the postulation for which poverty was only linked to unemployment proved to be wrong. And in fact, Eurostat and other statistical institutions record that not only unemployment, but particularly low-paid and insecure employment may give rise to poverty, and in our case, to inward poverty. And look at the single labor markets of European member states. Inward poverty mostly affect specific vulnerable groups of individuals.
Thank you, Dr. Ratti. And my next question is to Dr. Becker. So which types of workers in details that the project consider? I know you coordinate the Dutch case study. Do you take also the gender dimension in this consideration as well?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Indeed, we look at specific groups. So the project distinguishes 4 of these groups to have a really good look at who is particularly vulnerable. It varies from country to country, and yes, there is also a gender dimension that we take into account. And the 4 different groups that we monitor are, first of all, people who are in low-skilled or unskilled jobs, but still have a permanent and also full-time employment contract. And then a second group is the group of people who are solo self-employed, so the entrepreneurs, but without having employees themselves. The third group are fixed-term workers and those who have a part-time job and have this in an involuntary way. And then the fourth group is quite a diverse group and maybe also new types of workers. It consists of people with casual jobs. So for instance, people with 0-hour contracts or on-call contracts. And also platform workers who work in the gig economy. So those 4 groups we look at. And indeed, we distinguish between men and women, but also we look at the size of the household, for instance, and age groups.
And still to you, Dr. Becker, have you already come to any conclusions?
Yeah, so in particular for the Netherlands, this is our first focus now, and later on in the project we will compare the countries that Dr. Ratti mentioned. So I do have some preliminary results for the Netherlands. If you look at the 4 groups, then in the Netherlands, overall in work poverty is quite moderate, only 5.5% compared to over 9% in the EU average. And then focusing on the groups, in particular self-employed, solo self-employed, are more at risk to be in work poor in the Netherlands. So this group in particular, and also people with part-time jobs. Quite surprising, maybe, the group of low-skilled or unskilled jobs with permanent and full-time employment contracts, they actually have a lower than average in work poverty rate in the Netherlands.
Right. I'm going to turn now to Dr. Ratti and ask a question that I know you still don't have the data now, because obviously we're talking about a group of workers who has been mostly affected by the pandemic, and they're going to still be hit harder than the rest of, let's say, regular higher income workers by the pandemic, even afterwards, once we're going to talk about how the workers are going to be coming out of the pandemic. You still don't have the data, but what kind of predictions can you make at this time or in this time?
Well, we have seen all European governments introducing supporting schemes for employees and for the self-employed alike, as well as, of course, supports for all economic sectors in terms of benefits for the employers. The point about data on inward poverty is that normally data on inward poverty come out 9 to 10 months after the year of reference. So we are expecting to have the first pandemic data, so to say, referred to 2020 after summer 2021. This will allow us to consider this data both on 2020 and on 2021, because the project lasts 3 years, so it will run until January 23. Therefore, at that time, we will really be able to have an overall assessment of how the pandemic impacted the different VUP groups. But it's already there. We can see already that some groups have been more affected than other ones, particularly I have in mind, and some sectors as well, particularly I have in mind solo self-employed that have been hit hard, and some sectors that are really struggling nowadays.
And what does the EU do to tackle in-work poverty? And we know also right now there is a recovery plan that is going to be put into action.
Well, the approach by the European Union towards inward poverty is quite a recent one, because, well, since the 70s, the European Commission started to introduce some anti-poverty programs. But the inward poverty point was focalized only since 2003, 2004, which means that it's a relatively new policy commitment. And if we look at the official documents, only in 2017, so only with the European Pillar of Social Rights proclaimed in November 17, we have that the European Union commits itself to combat inward poverty. Particularly there we have one of its principles, principle number 6, which is really focused on the elimination of inward poverty. Of course, the current recovery plans at national level should take this into account. The European approach on this is very much based on the proposal for a directive on adequate minimum wages, as well as on the initiatives on platform work and on basic income, on guaranteed basic income for all.
Right, and one more question for Dr. Becker. What is the value of social dialogue regarding the protection of these vulnerable workers?
I think it's quite important. If you look at the Netherlands again, then we have a very strong history and culture of social dialogue. a lot of sector level collective agreements are being made, but also sometimes company level. And these sector level collective labor agreements are applied generally applicable. And that means that about 85% of our workers are covered by a collective labor agreement. I think this might explain why these low-skilled and unskilled jobs who are permanent and full-time have quite a low in-work poverty rate, because these workers are covered by a collective labor agreement. However, you need to have then a permanent and full-time contract. And this is a rarity in the Netherlands. It's becoming more and more scarce because we have a lot of flexible workers, and we also have very high part-time employment rates. And this is, I think, the key challenge, to also make sure that these people can get access to decent protection. So here maybe social dialogue might need to step up their efforts to also include these types of workers in their protective sphere.
And one last question to Dr. Ratti. Of course, we know that the rise in work poverty affects the economic stability, social cohesion, and the very concept of the EU citizenship. In this scenario, what is the expected contribution of this project, and what are your expectations regarding decent wage in Europe for the coming years?
Yeah, well, there are two things. One of the expected outcomes. Well, first of all, we are lawyers and we are all academics, most of us. So the first expected outcome is definitely an objective assessment of the state of the art of in-work poverty in Europe. But of course, from this, we aim to deliver some policy proposals addressed both to national legislators and to the EU. On a more theoretical level, this should lead us to a reconceptualization of the European citizenship, making social rights functional to that concept of European citizenship. On a more practical level, the last part of the project will be devoted to develop a so-called certificate that we have called Good Job, which is addressed to employers that guarantee good working conditions to their employees. This might be an important practical tool to develop a culture of good employment. And when it comes to the second point you mentioned, so decent wages, I think the European initiative on a proposal for a directive on adequate minimum wages, well, it's a very, very much important step. First of all, from a political perspective, but also from a technical perspective, because particularly in the preambles of the proposed directive, we can see already some attention on the reduction of in-work poverty. And therefore, hopefully, if the current text of the proposal goes through, we may have a legal framework where both the member states that have a statutory minimum wage and the member states that don't have such statutory minimum wage but rely normally on collective agreements, we see their labor markets ameliorated by that proposal.
Well, Dr. Becker and Dr. Ratti, thank you very much for this conversation. And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and that you've done. And this project, the Work in JEPO, and then as well as the We and EP workers and the European unions are very important in bringing the attention to the real issues that workers are facing, and especially vulnerable workers. So I think it is really good to bring the attention of all the work that you do, and hopefully to pressure all the social partners in place to take action for better and fair working conditions for workers. So thank you again for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.